Donalyn Curry, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Joy in Our Town. What determines how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about life in general, and how do we feel about our future? Feelings can be quite fickle. That's why it's so important that we don't allow our feelings to shape our attitudes and our decisions in our life. Teens are especially vulnerable to being manipulated by their feelings, often resulting in poor life choices. Today, my special guest, Dr. Ken Brown, is here on the set. He's here to talk with us about achieving emotional and mental stability. You want to tune in for this. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ken.
Thank you, Donna, for having me.
I wanted to ask you your opinion on what we hear this saying, you know, perception is reality. But I want to ask you, how often when a person feels bad about themselves, how often do they actually have legitimate reasons that they, you know, is it their perception? Do they internalize the feelings and that produces their outcome because of how they felt about it? Let's talk about that. Feelings, internalizing feelings based on reality versus perception.
Well, some people, of course, in this modern age says there's no such thing as reality. They think it's all feelings. They say perception is equal to reality. Perception is truth. You have your truth, I have my truth. There's no such thing as truth. Well, of course, as a Christian, I don't believe that. I think that there are absolutes, and there are things that are absolutely true all the time. The problem is that when we're in the middle of our emotions, in the middle of our feelings, we start to distort. You know, we always say within the addiction industry, when the alcohol goes in, the wit goes out. But when you're a teenager, when the hormones go in, the wit goes out. When feelings, strong feelings start to happen to you, then you're not going to be making decisions correctly. Your perception starts to distort. You know, pain always distorts perception. Matter of fact, Tony Robbins says any decision made in the middle of a strong feeling, such as fear, is going to be the wrong decision. And I think that we just got to understand that we're just human beings. We make decisions. We look at life through our lens, the lens being our emotions. And we can't help it. It's like God has given us a big, huge feeler that seems to be always in front. You've heard the expression wearing your heart on your sleeve. Mm-hmm. It's like that our feelings are in front, and we're so, even though we act tough and strong, we all are babies. We all can get hurt so easily. But as soon as we start getting hurt, it starts to change the way we think. And we can't help it. You know, there are things that we can do. But the initial process of having our perceptions distorted by our feelings is universal to all of us.
You know, you mentioned about teenagers and the hormones going in. Tell me about how teenagers are especially vulnerable to emotions. Tell me about how outside forces affect teenagers when there's so much going on inside.
Those are two good questions, actually. You know, the one question is the internal process and the external process. Certainly, in reference to teenagers, they're awash in hormones. I mean, they're growing. The pituitary gland is firing up. It's like lighting up like a Christmas tree, and it's sending all these hormones to the endocrine system, swirling through the body. You ever noticed a teenager, 11, 12 to 14, all of a sudden they start to become moody, and you know, here's my sweet child who was so kind and loving and happy before. All of a sudden they're kicking the can, they're you know, grumbling, they're talking back, and they're morose, and and you wonder, well, why is that? Well, that's partly it's because the hormones hitting them, and it's actually changing the way that their brain is operating. They're having to deal with hormones and feelings that they've never felt before. It's physiological. Then, of course, normally what happens by the time the child is about 15, they start to handle some of those. Sometimes they become withdrawn. But your second question was actually even more profound, and that is, how does it affect, does that tie into, we'll call it peer pressure? How does it affect the child in their environment with their friends? I say that teenagers need socialization like we need air. one of the most important things is for a child to learn who they are in the context of other people. Certainly they need to know who they are in the context of their family, their parents. But other teenagers become a group by which they measure who they are. The main work of a teenager is individuation. It's becoming themselves. So the problem is they start to define themselves by other people. And here we go. The hormones are hitting. You ever notice that some people, when they are early bloomers, and other people are late bloomers? Now, I was a late bloomer. You know, I was the, 4-foot-nothing kid when everybody else was 6-foot giants, And I was always thinking, oh, I wish I was like them. I wish I could have just grown up when I was 14 or 15. On the other hand, when I started to talk to some of my guy friends, they were just saying, oh, what do you mean? I'm ungainly. I'm too big. I don't fit in. I'm the jolly green giant. Everybody's teasing me. Of course, I was very attracted to the girl that, blossomed early. Well, that same girl that I was talking to, she said, it's a curse. It's a curse. Everybody is looking at me. I'm being treated as if I'm no longer a kid. I'm old before my time. So everybody is in that boat where we're looking at ourselves and we're feeling ungainly and we're trying to measure ourselves in conjunction with other people. And that's just where it starts. Peer pressure even gets worse than that.
Oh, absolutely. I have straight hair or curly hair, and I don't know who I am. Talk to me about the stereotype, the emo person or the emo personality. What is that?
Oh yeah, emo, of course, was actually a type of music. Kind of came from the heavy music, but it was a music that was kind of like, heavy in the lyrics. But it was based on nihilism. Nihilism is basically the belief in nothing, the belief that life is empty, life doesn't have purpose or meaning, which is a great opportunity, if you look at it from our angle, for us as Christians, because we could start sharing with these people that feel, what's the point of it all? What's it all about, Alfie? We can actually say there is a point, there is a purpose, there's hope. Matter of fact, our ministry is Hope Counseling, our adoption agency, Hope for Families. We're all about hope, because we have to give that indispensable ingredient to people, hope. But the emo person now, how words and language are fluid, how, my kids are saying, wicked! And they didn't mean wicked at all, they mean, kind of cool, But now if you say cool, that's corny, right? Well, emo now, of course, it used to mean people that were very much into goth, dark eyeshadows. They were cutters. They would be termed, if you brought an emo person into my clinical counseling office, it would be someone that probably had some serious emotional problems, and they were erring on the side, of course, of being depressed. The modern lingo nowadays, it's just an emo is someone that is very emotional. And why criticize me for just being emotional? Because I'm emotional, which means I'm real and I'm genuine. Well, that's not necessarily the way the term started.
Okay. Well, in your opinion, then, you mentioned that we all come with this barometer of emotions, and we wear our heart on our sleeve. So then, when is it good to be emotional, and when is it destructive?
That is a great question too, Donna. I mean, because emotions God made us to be emotional people. On the kaleidoscope of our life, He's placed a keyboard with various notes. God actually has feelings. We're made in the image of God. God loves. God cares. God gets jealous. God is passionate. God made us with feelings. The only problem is, can you imagine if you were standing, if you've had a child who's 3 years old, and they kept pushing C note on the piano, beep, 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 beep. Pretty soon you get tired of that note. Or if they're pounding the keys without any regard to harmony or the chords, the natural rules that are inside of music that we know deep inside, this sounds pleasant, this doesn't sound pleasant. Well, a child doesn't understand that. So a lot of times people play their emotions, Donna, exactly the same way. They keep playing the note of depression or the note of anxiety, or they start, pounding the keyboards and getting angry and upset, and they end up making this funeral dirge, this horrible sound that is destructive and not at all appealing. So emotions that were intended to be good can be quite destructive, especially when we allow our emotions to rule us. There's a wonderful book written by Joyce Myers called The Battlefield of the Mind. In that book, brilliant book, she just says basically, don't let your emotions run away with you. You've got a battlefield inside you. And what the trouble is, we have a tendency to let our feelings rule us. Hollywood says it's okay to do that. You know, how can it be wrong if it feels so right?
Hollywood says follow your heart. Do you think it's okay to follow your heart?
Well, the Bible says that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? That's Jeremiah 17:9. In Luke 6, Jesus brings out the proposition that a good person follows his good heart and then does good things out of his good heart. An evil person has a bad heart, and then they do all sorts of actions out of his bad heart. And so the issue really, Donna, is not the heart. It's the person. Mm-hmm. Do you have a good heart? Do you have a bad heart? I remember when my dear daughter was doing this or that, I said, honey, do you want to be defined by this moment? Is this who you want to become? Do you want to be known by this series of actions? Because this series of actions tells more about you, tells more about your heart, tells more about who you are than it does about the other person that's involved in the equation. And the fact is that do we want to be good people? Do we want to have a good heart? If we do, God will help us.
You know, we told preschoolers, now you need to turn that around. You know, there's always the hope, as you said, to turn it around. Can people turn it around? Can people live a happier, more positive life, Doctor?
The answer is yes, absolutely. Of course, as a clinical counselor, there's a thing called cognitive reattribution. You know, we basically take the same truth, we turn it around, we put a new perspective on it. You know, the problems are not problems, they're opportunities. Take those lemons and make them into lemonade. And we hear this all the time.
Right.
But more importantly than just psychobabble, talking about it from a clinical or psychological viewpoint, what's more important is the fact we do not have the power by ourselves to do that by ourselves. We need God's help. We need to hook up into God's power supply. He's the only one that can give us joy and give us peace and give us a hope in the middle of bad and trying times. In Habakkuk, it tells us in chapter 3, where all these bad things were happening to them. And he says, I will still have joy in the Lord. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Why? Because he was finding his hookup in God.
That's brilliant.
And we need to hook into God so that God can give us what we need to live and not be in bondage to despair or trapped by our emotions.
As parents, we know we can hook up to God. It's a little more awkward for children sometimes. My question is, should we screen the company our children are keeping?
Yes.
Is it our responsibility as parents?
It's definitely our responsibility to screen. And of course, the problem is that question is a broad question because it does affect a great range of ages. So what you can do for a child when they're 5 is not what you can do when they're 15, because the children change over time. And remember, at some point, the child's going to choose their friends regardless of you. Parents have an illusion of power, an illusion of control. But you know, as a parent, Donna, we only have a very small amount of power and control. You know what? The thing that we need to do is need to help our kids pick wisely, pick our friends wisely. And of course, the best friend that you could have is God.
I love it. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Brown, today on this episode of Joy in Our Town. And remember, the joy is in the solution. God bless you. For more information on today's topic, you can contact our guests at the web address or phone number on the screen.